Eagles Entertainment.
With the 12th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got another fun show today. It all starts at the top with Pick 6. Greg Cosell from NFL Films. He's going to join the show. We're going to get into the trenches. We're going to talk about some offensive linemen with Greg. We've dabbled a little bit here in this position with Greg, but really we're going to dive into 6 more players that really stand out to him on film. 5 offensive tackles that I've picked, and then I'm going to ask him to pick one guy that he's higher on that he's not seeing a lot of buzz about. So we'll get on those players with Greg in Pick 6. After that, we've got Mr. Relevant, where this week PFF's Mike Renner is going to jump on, and he's going to go through the big board from PFF. The latest edition of their top 100 just came out, and we'll also talk through some guys that he likes more than everybody else. So we'll talk through that with Mike, who always brings great insight to the show. Afterwards, we're going to go to Draft Buzz, where Ben Fennell and I are going to go through Chad Reuter's 4-round mock draft. That's right, 4-round mock draft from NFL.com. We'll do all that in Draft Buzz as well. We're going to close this up. Draft mailbag. Got a couple of good questions from you at home to close out the show. Before we get things going, just a quick reminder, jump onto Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Appreciate everybody that has done that. Not only can you leave your questions, we'll answer them here in our draft mailbag, but it helps make the show more available to other people that are looking for podcasts about the NFL draft. And whether you're an Eagles fan or if you're a fan of another NFL team, you know we cater this show for everybody. So please keep spreading the word about the show. Appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast everywhere on social media. That being said, let's get rolling here. I'm excited to kick things off now at the top with Greg Cosell in Pick 6.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, we're excited to get into Pick 6 here with my friend Greg Cosell. And Greg, before we get into the 6 players that we wanted to focus in on, and we're going to do offensive linemen today, I want to ask you about the big trades that happened. The Eagles were involved in a couple of them, and we broke them down from all 3 teams' perspective earlier in the week. But I want to ask you, the big discussion point right now around the NFL, around the coverage of the NFL, who are the 49ers trading up for? Which of the quarterbacks is the guy that makes the most sense for them as they're currently constructed? And I want to kind of get your sense, because I know that you just studied this offense again in preparation for this segment. So you got to see a little bit more Trey Lance here in the last week. What do you think in terms of Lance and his fit to the 49ers?
Well, give me a minute here, friend. I'm just going to call Kyle, and I'll tell you in a minute. You know what? It's funny because I studied in detail this morning Dylan Raidin's their left tackle, because we're going to talk offensive lineman, and I just wanted to kind of go over him again. So, I have some sense of what I'm talking about with Dylan Raidin. And so, of course, I was seeing Trey Lance again. I'd watched 8 games of his prior, but, I'm seeing him again. And he is, in my view, because of the offense that he ran, and I know you know that offense well because we did Carson Wentz a number of years ago, and now Lance, you've studied as well. He is more advanced and refined than any quarterback in this draft class when it comes to the conventional play-action pass game operating under center, because that was a significant part of their offense, and it's hardly a part of any team's offense in college football, with very, very few exceptions. But they ran a multiple play-action pass game with him under center. They ran a multiple 2-back play-action pass game. And I think I started to, get a little deja vu because their fullback wears number 44, which is Kyle Juszczyk's number. Right. So I think, I started to feel, oh, wow, this is an omen. But getting serious for a minute, the more I just thought about it, and of course it's all speculation. We don't know, but this is fun. Yeah. I could just see Trey Lance really fitting in to a Kyle Shanahan offense really well, given his background, given what he's been asked to do in college, given how well he's done it, and given the fact that Kyle Shanahan's offense really defines things for a quarterback. So even though people will say fairly that Lance didn't play this year and that he needs some time, I think that kind of offense shortens the time frame necessary to play reasonably well.
Yeah, I gave my thoughts on why it made sense and why it didn't make sense for Trey Lance there, but just kind of good to hear you see it as you watch the film and see that same meshing, that same, it just fits. And look, the trading up, and there's so much buzz about it being Mac Jones, like trading 3 first-round picks for Mac Jones. Like if you're giving up 3 first-round picks for a player, my guess is that it's going to be for a guy with high-end traits. And obviously that I wouldn't say that is what Mac Jones brings to the party. Right? That's not necessarily his toolbox.
No. At the end of the day, say what you want. Mac Jones may end up being a very nice NFL player.
Good player. Yeah, I think he's going to be a starter. Like I like Mac Jones, but different kind of conversation.
Trey Lance is one of those guys that can make special plays.
Yep.
And I think you're right. When you let's even if you're saying they only traded 2 number ones, because essentially what they did is they switched number ones this year, but they then 2 further number ones.
Yep.
I think you're looking for a player who can make special plays, not just an executor and a ball distributor. And Mac Jones may end up being a high-level executor and ball distributor, but he's not going to make special plays outside of structure, which seemingly now have become essential in the league.
Yep. All right, well, let's get into some offensive linemen here because you and I, we've already dug into the offensive tackle position a little bit. We busted a little bit of a bunch there with Sam Cosmi from Texas, Liam Eichenberg of Notre Dame, Alex Leatherwood from Alabama. We talked about that trio a few weeks back. So we're going to talk about a few different players here. And obviously, Penei Sewell sitting at the top of the draft. Seems unlikely that he would fall outside the top 10 in terms of being available for the Eagles. And everybody kind of views him, for the most part, as the universal top offensive lineman. So I figured, all right, let's take a look at 6 other players that that have the ability to play offensive tackle potentially. And let's just break them down and kind of get your thoughts. And we'll start with Rashaan Slater, who's the offensive lineman that if you don't like Sewell the most, I think most people would say, okay, it's Slater. Interested to kind of get your thoughts on what you've seen from him on film and how you see him projecting to the NFL.
Well, I think he projects as a tackle. I know you and I have had this conversation. You see him more as a guard, but I think you start him as a tackle. As I've said a number of times over the last couple of weeks, 64 tackles start every Sunday in this league, and you need to line up with 64 of them. And they don't all have the ideal length and sweet feet of Joe Thomas or Laramie Tunsil. There's very few of those guys. I think he was consistently effective in pass pro. He uses that independent arm technique very well. He's a balance and body control player through his reps. I thought he was good in the run game, working to the second level. He had a good feel for leverage and angles. He's one of those guys with his body type because he's not long. He's kind of streamlined and compact in his movement, but I think he really understands how to use his body. And I thought there was a lot to like about his game.
Yeah, obviously I opted out this past year. Going back, were there games that stood out to you most, or both good or bad, watching him a year ago for Northwestern?
Well, it's funny. Everybody points to the Ohio State game and his reps against Chase Young, and he had some good reps.
Yep.
But there were also plays against Chase Young where they had a tight end right next to him, either on the line of scrimmage or in a wing position. And of course, that changes the way a defensive end rushes the quarterback. But he had some very good reps against him. He certainly wasn't overmatched. The one game where I thought he did have some problems, and I'm sure that's where a lot of the people who believe he's a guard come into play, was against Iowa when he played against A.J. Epinesa, whose long arms got inside of him on a number of snaps and caused some problems because he's not long relative to the ideal desired length for an offensive tackle.
Let's go to another guy who I think has a similar kind of profile. And I love Elijah Vera-Tucker, the offensive lineman from USC. This past year, played left tackle. The year before, played some left guard. So he's got some position versatility. Interested to get your thoughts on how you see Vera-Tucker making that jump to the league.
And I think he'll be the same situation. We'll see him as a guard because he does have experience there. But I think he can play tackle. Again, I thought his 2020 tape at left tackle was very impressive, both as a run blocker and in pass pro. He's a naturally powerful man, but he's got light feet. I think he's got good lateral movement. Another guy has very good balance, strong hands. There's essentially, there's 3 kinds of pass sets. I'm sure there's more detail for guys who know more about O-line play than I do, but essentially there's the short set, there's the 45-degree angle set, and there's the vertical set. And I thought he did a really nice job with the vertical set, because that would be a concern when a guy does not have great length, either with his body or with his arms. But I thought he did a really good job controlling the edge, even though he doesn't have great length. He kind of reminded me in his body type and in the manner in which he played of Tristan Wirfs. And Wirfs had a phenomenal year, as I believe he was a top 10 pick, was he not?
I believe he went top 15. I think he was like 12 or 13.
Okay,
like that.
Yeah. And I remember watching him coming out of Iowa. Some people, again, said he was a guard because of his body type, but he obviously did a great job at right tackle for the Super Bowl champion Bucks. to me, Vera-Tucker struck me as somewhat similar, just in the way he was built and the manner in which he played.
Interesting. I think that, and that's why, honestly, I don't know how you do it when you bunch your guys together when you're taking your notes, but I stopped a long time ago of trying to split guys into tackles, guards, and centers in my work in terms of the way I almost look at it as like, okay, here's the tackle guard bunch, here are the guard center bunch, and there's still some overlap there, right. But at least then, because I feel like, number one, that's how teams view it when they're cutting their roster down to 53, because it's like, all right, like who are the guys that have the tackle guard flexibility? Who are the guys that have the guard center flexibility? But it's just so hard to be able to say, oh, well, 32 teams, 17 might see this guy as a guard, 15 might see him as a tackle. There might be other teams that view players as, you know what I mean? Like it's so, I think the position versatility is a blessing for sure. But it's so hard for us on the outside to peg that for all 32 teams.
And I also think about it in the way I mentioned a moment ago, is that you still got to line up with 64 of them.
Exactly.
There's not going to be 64 that are ideal in terms of the traits you want at the tackle position. Mm-hmm. There just aren't that many guys like that. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, if we're not going to sit here and go through the 64 starting offensive tackles in the league, but I guarantee more than half of them would be guys that people who are smarter than I am anyway, as far as evaluating offensive linemen, would say, well, they're not really great offensive tackles in terms of traits and attributes, but you still got to line them up, and so that's why when I watch the guys who play offensive tackle in college, my immediate thought when I'm watching them is to think of them as a tackle. They have to show me that they can't play tackle, because like I said, they're not going to look like Joe Thomas. They're just not. Is
there a line in the sand that you're like, all right, like at this point, I really do feel like this guy has to move to guard?
Well, I think, to me, the line in the sand would be in 45-degree and vertical sets if they really struggle with the edge, when their edge gets challenged. If they can't control that arc, then it's going to be a tough deal.
What does that look like on film?
It's that just becomes, kind of, it when you see it.
Feel it kind of thing. Yep.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Because what happens then is, is they end up turning to the sideline way too soon, and then they open themselves up to the inside. They just end up playing in recovery mode the entire rep, and you can't play in recovery mode, as an offensive tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, just for our listeners, a couple of ways that I've kind of been pointing to look for that. Number one, Greg just said it, was if a guy turns to the sideline immediately, if he's parallel to the sideline, that means that they struggle to get from A to B. They struggle to get to their landmark to stay in good position to protect against a speed rush. But then number two is if a guy is all kinds of out of control. If he's able to get to A to B, but he is out of control when he gets there, and his base is bad and his hands are bad, now you see, well, what good was it to get there on time if you are all kinds of out of control? So it's just something to keep an eye on.
That's a great point. And one of the things I learned from an offensive line coach was, when you pass set, your inside foot needs to stay straight and square through at least your first two slides. You don't want to be turning to the sideline that quickly, because then you open yourself up. But your point is a great one. You can see when a guy is laboring to get to his landmark. And when he's laboring to get to his landmark, that's a problem.
Let's get to the next player here. And this is a guy I feel most people see as a pure tackle, and that's Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you saw from him.
Now, to me, he is a pure tackle. To me, I felt watching his tape that just in terms of pure ease of movement, that he topped my list. I think that he's got really light athletic feet. You noticed in pass pro, you noticed it in the run game. I think that he's really loose-hipped with good balance and stature, kept his hands in good position. There's a guy in his vertical pass set, and there weren't a ton of them in Virginia Tech's offense, but there's always enough. I thought he was just so smooth and fluid. It looked like he wasn't really working hard to do what he needed to get done.
He's a really interesting study, and a guy that, coming in, not a lot of people were discussing, obviously an underclassman, and the highlights are so impressive. You see him out in space and just how under control he can be. He is certainly a fun watch. And like I said, of the guys that we're discussing, and the first 5 names I want to bring up to you, he's the guy I feel that the least amount of people are saying, oh, he's got to slide inside the guard. I think almost everybody views him as a pure tackle as opposed to some of these other names. Let's get into another guy. And this is a guy I love this player's film, and that's Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State. Another guy who really turned it on this year, and you see that some of those same devastating finishes on film that you see with Darashaw at times as well. What did you see from Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State?
And he's another guy that some might think is a guard because he's not a higher level athlete. But again, I think he's a tackle. You could argue his feet were a little heavy at times. Sometimes he played over his feet, but he's an aggressive, competitive guy. He's really good in the run game. Great finishing traits, a nasty edge to his play, which NFL O-line coaches, they love that stuff. He's a physical tempo setter for an O-line. That's the kind of guy he is. I would say he's not quite as strong in pass protection, but there were some really excellent short sets. There were some good vertical sets. I think he uses his hands well. He's got strength throughout his body. When he can be proactive and aggressive using his heavy hands, he's really good in pass pro. He's more of a strong man player than he is a purely athletic player. But to me, he should be given the opportunity to line up at tackle.
Yeah, I kind of saw him the same way. I felt that he would be great inside, but I feel like this is a guy I'd like to see what he can do at tackle as well. One player I feel is interesting. We didn't get a chance to see Tevin Jenkins at the Senior Bowl. He declined the invitation. There were a couple other guys that I was excited to see in Mobile as well. But Dylan Raiden from North Dakota State did go down there. He won Practice Player of the Week, regardless of position, down there for his performance in Mobile. So I'm excited to get your thoughts on what you've seen from Raiden and how you view his ability to make that jump to the league as well.
Well, now it's interesting because we were talking earlier about kind of, having a core with some flexibility, having some good foot quickness.
Yep.
I thought he struggled a bit with that in pass pro. He's a terrific run blocker.
Yep.
And, my guess is different O-line coaches and different teams will have him evaluated in much different ways. He was certainly a highly efficient player at North Dakota State against a lower level of competition, but he was highly, highly efficient. He didn't have any problems there at all. But I think the tape raises some meaningful issues as to how he would transition to the league. He's not the level of athlete you ideally want on the outside. And as I kept projecting him in my mind, Fran, I just thought that he would struggle versus quality edge pass rushers in the NFL with that lack of foot quickness, with that lack of the lateral movement traits that you ideally like. And in fact, the more I watched him, I don't know why this guy popped into my head, but I kept thinking of Mitch Morse, who made the transition from playing right tackle at Missouri for 3 straight years, a 3-year starter at Missouri at right tackle, and gets drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs and is an offensive center right from day one.
I love that. Yep.
I kind of think Dylan Raiden, to me, I kind of saw the same thing. And that was the comparison that just randomly jumped into my head. So, look, I'm sure there'll be teams that see him as a tackle. I'm not saying I'm right, but that's the way I saw him. I thought, okay, this guy with his competitiveness, really good run blocker, physical, but just not that level of athlete. I thought he could be a really good center.
He's a really interesting study, and I love that comparison. And we've talked on this show before about trying to project offensive linemen in position switches, and not necessarily the tackle, he's got to play guard, but I love the tackle to center conversions because those are relatively unique. And you do hear of them every once in a while, not even the guys like Morse who did make it. But I remember even when Jonah Williams was coming out of Alabama, there was he could be a tackle, but yeah, he might be a great center. And you hear that all the time. I think it's interesting hearing the guys that can make that jump from tackle all the way inside to the pivot.
Yeah. And I again, just like you, I don't sit and watch guys and go, who does he remind me of as I'm watching the plays?
Right.
Something either pops into your head or it doesn't pop into your head. I don't spend a half hour after I finish watching a guy, trying to figure out who you reminded me of. Either it happens or it doesn't happen, and I'm sure you're relatively the same way.
That's right.
But that's just how I saw him. I mean, he was one of those guys where I truly believe he would struggle lining up a tackle in the NFL.
And then the last question, we always try to wrap it this way. Is there a player that you've studied at offensive tackle that you're just surprised you haven't heard more buzz on, that just really the film kind of jumped at you in terms of what you were able to see and his ability to make that jump?
Well, we'll mention 2 names, but the name that I really want to mention was Brendan James out of Nebraska. I really liked his tape. I've seen a lot of him, and I really like his tape. He's a finesse guy more than a physical mauling tackle, but he's got good length throughout his body. He's kind of got a linear build because he's not heavy. Those who focus on this would say his arm length is shorter than desired, but I think he's got good athletic ability. I think he can mirror effectively versus edge speed. I think he's got good body control. Thinks he uses his hands well. He's going to be one of those guys that may not be viewed as a top 10 guy coming out, but I think he's going to be a quality starting offensive tackle in the NFL at some point, maybe sooner than later. And the one guy that I think is worth mentioning, and he's only played one game in the last 2 years, but my guess is if he played a lot of games, we'd be talking about him in the top 20, and that's Walker Little from Stanford, who I know you watched as well that one game. And it was against Northwestern, the opener of 2019. And boy, he was pretty good in that game.
He was really good, Greg. Yeah. And that's why, honestly, he is one of my favorite case studies in this draft. I cannot wait to see where he goes, because he could go top 25 and I'd be like, yeah, I know it's a jump. It's a huge risk, but I see it. He could go fourth round and be like, yeah, I get that he went fourth round. He only played one game in the last 2 years. Either way, I can see it. But that game was phenomenal. And this was a kid who was a big-time recruit, had a good freshman year, and that one game in his sophomore season looked outstanding.
Oh, he was a 5-star. I mean, he was, some people thought he was the best recruit in the nation. What I typed in my transition, the last thing was my sense is that if Little had more tape and continued to show what he did versus Northwestern, with the likelihood of further improvement, he would be viewed as a first-round pick. And then I put in parentheses, which he might be anyway, and one of the better offensive tackle prospects in this draft class. Yeah,
I could absolutely see him going a lot earlier than people are projecting. And that will be a lot of fun, because people will be flabbergasted by that. But he is a fun player for sure. I'm glad that you saw him the same way I did. Well, Greg, fun as always. Thanks for giving us some insight into the offensive lineman and talking a little bit of quarterback with us as well. We'll catch you next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Thanks, Fran.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome back here to the show a guy who's been on numerous times before, and that's Mike Renner from Pro Football Focus. Mike, thanks for jumping on, man.
Appreciate you having me back. I must be doing something right. You keep asking me. Right?
Yeah, well, more than one thing, right? You're doing a lot of great stuff over there at PFF. And I want to ask you, you put out a tweet on Tuesday. We're recording this early Wednesday afternoon. You put out something on Tuesday regarding the schemes of the top quarterbacks in this draft. And I thought this was awesome, because it really kind of put some things into context for people. You kind of highlighted the amount of RPOs and screens that are in all of these guys' offenses. You noted that, Trevor Lawrence, he had the most. He had 27% of his throws were screens and RPOs. Mac Jones, 22.5%. Then it was Zach Wilson, then Trey Lance. All the way down to the bottom was Justin Fields, and he was just over 8%. And I'm glad you highlighted this, because, Ben and I have talked about this a lot. Dane has talked about this a lot here on the show, and it just backs up what we've discussed, and that this Ohio State offense, it's not QB friendly. It's not like, all screens and RPOs and just get the ball out of his hands fast. And look, he's had his share of issues. I'm not saying that Justin Fields is a perfect prospect, but I think that that's kind of interesting that you were able to kind of highlight that, give us some context in terms of what all of these guys were asked to do offensively.
Yeah, the QB friendliness of Ohio State's offense is that you're surrounded by other NFL players. That's the QB friendliness that Justin Fields has, that he has guys who can get open and rely on. It is not, and that's why he still graded extremely well on PFF's grading systems, because he still had to make difficult throws. He still had to push the ball down the football field repeatedly to gain his yards. He had the most yards through the air in the country, the highest percentage of his yards through the air in the country this past season, like 20% or so more than Dwayne Haskins did when he was coming out. It is a vastly different offense than what Dwayne Haskins was running. So if you're going to say, oh, Dwayne Haskins, look how he looked in the NFL. And obviously a lot of that was not on the field stuff. A lot of that was his work ethic, the work he put in off the field. You're going to say that it doesn't add up. Like Justin Fields, it's a completely different sort of scheme that he was running there.
And the topic du jour this week is obviously with the San Francisco 49ers trading up to number 3. Who are they going to take? Which of these quarterbacks is their target? Water gun to your head as we sit here Wednesday, a month out from the draft. Who do you think makes the most sense there for them at number 3?
Man, I think they do take Mac Jones.
It's wild, right?
I think they do.
Yeah.
But I don't want to believe it. Like, I think that I don't want to believe it because they really, the going to Alabama Pro Day thing, like there's no real reason to tip your hand at this or to not tip your hand at this point. Like I think they know why they went up to 3 is because they know that you're locked in at Lawrence and Wilson 1 and 2. Like, I think that's why that deal got made after the BYU Pro Day and after having seen, the Jets' interest in Zach Wilson still going up and making that play. Like, I cannot fathom a world where that's who I'm giving up 3 first round picks for is Mac Jones. But I do think, there's more than enough smoke and arrows pointing to it being Mac Jones that if I, like I say, gun to my head, I had to pick one, I think that's who it's going to be.
Yeah, and you and I don't want to speak for you, but I feel we both like Mac Jones. Like I like Mac Jones' ability to come in and be a starter, but that's just it's a very rich proposition for sure, giving up 3 first-round picks ultimately for him.
That's the biggest thing. It's like you have to win. Basically, you have to have a guy that can get you the high end and get you to a Super Bowl because you're not going to be able to build talent around him. And you're not going to build the perfect situation around him when you don't have that much draft capital to do so. So the guys who give you that high end, the guys with legit high-end tools in the NFL. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100. Drew Brees is like the lone kind of exception of a guy who got by with gave you that elite play with less than stellar arm talent and like to the level that Mac Jones has. So that's just, I can't get on board with that play if that's who they're going up against.
So I wanted to hit on that with you first because the real reason I did bring you on was to talk through the PFF Top 100. The newest big board came out this week, and I wanted to kind of hit you up on a few different items from that for people who haven't seen it yet. And, 2 guys that I would think are seen as pretty polarizing players in this class are both in the top 25 for you guys. So Jason Owe from Penn State, the pass rusher, 0 sacks this past year. Walker Little, 0 starts, only 1 start in 24 months over the past 2 seasons with Stanford. Interested to get your thoughts on both of these guys because I love both players as well. Interested to get your expertise in terms of why they made it into your top 25.
Yeah, so start with Owe. His pro day, what he did athletically, I think 39.5-inch vertical, 11-foot broad jump, or 11.1, 4.3, 8.40, all time. Like in terms of edge defenders, all time physical tools, what he brings to the table. And I think he had the sub 7.3 cone as well. Like that is an all time pro day. He has an all time physical skill set. And when you get to the NFL, we know how much that position is, I don't want to say dependent, but how much it helps to be a physical freak in terms of rushing the passer. It gets you so far. It makes your life so much easier to where you don't have to have too far to go. And so I think the biggest thing with Owe is we're already seen some massive improvement in regards to some big things about his profile that in the past were issues. 2019 wasn't even a starter because he was a liability in run defense, liability in how he attacked blocks. That changed wholesale, I thought, this past season to 2020. He played with so much better leverage. And for a guy who just started playing football in 2016, to see that kind of incremental year-on-year change, you just think, where could he go with, again, physical tools that are all-time type of ability? I just think 2 to 3 years from now, you'll see a vastly, vastly different player. And what he could be is well worth taking that chance. Like I said, I got him 23rd on the big board. It's well worth it around that area of the draft.
And to me, too, with Owe, when we talk about guys that have that ceiling, it's, okay, well, do they have the ability to make it to that ceiling? And you almost have to make that determination of whether or not you're willing to bet on the kid. Everything that I've heard about Jason Owe, the people that I've talked to with Penn State, say like, yeah, he's a great kid. Everybody loves him. He's just new to the game, and he's just trying to figure it out. He had some close calls. Obviously, the 0 sacks is something that he's going to have to carry with him. But overall, like, they all like him. So it's a matter of like, all right, is he going to put in that work to be able to reach that ceiling?
Yeah, and it's a very unique situation. Obviously, 0 sacks, but it was 0 sacks in 7 games because it was a shortened season, whatever. And he still had, I think, 5 hits this past year. To me, it's kind of reminiscent of, why is the name slipping my mind? The LSU guys now. With
Danielle Hunter.
Yeah. Where 1.5 sacks this last year. A unique situation where he wasn't really asked to rush the passer that much. When he did, was still pocket rushing and, not necessarily attacking, and was a raw player as a pass rusher coming out. And you've seen that development happen because, again, rare level of physical tools that get you in the building.
Yeah, we just finished talking about Walker Little with Greg in the last segment. Interested to get your thoughts on what you've seen from him over the course of his career.
Yeah, and another guy who you saw a big improvement from him, and they rave about him, David Shaw would rave about who he was as a freshman and sophomore. And that's all we got to see of him. And most top tackle prospects, most of the guys you think of as elite tackle prospects, at least get the junior tape on them. Most, if not more, you get senior tape on them. Like Quentin Nelson wasn't thought of as Quentin Nelson until his senior year at Notre Dame. And so we just didn't get to see that with Walker Little. That doesn't mean, and like 90 times out of 100 offensive linemen, you see them big incremental year-on-year change because it is such a skilled and development-based position. And with more reps and with more training, like guys do improve. And a lot of this is also based off the fact that the people I've talked to who are working with him closely and have worked with him closely saying this guy has it. Like he's putting in the work and has done the things necessary. He has developed from the guy we last saw on tape for that one game in 2019 against Northwestern. And then prior to that. So I'm putting a lot of trust in that and the fact that he was a special athlete and obviously tested out like a special athlete at his pro day, but like he was thought of in the tier with Tristan Wirfs, Andrew Thomas, Kai Becton going into that 2019 season, but just obviously career went a different way.
Yeah, to me, like, and you brought up how we expect those incremental improvements. I just got this morning, finished studying Ellerson Smith, the pass rusher from Northern Iowa. And it's the same kind of deal with Quinn Miners coming out of Wisconsin Whitewater, where we last see them in 2019. The film was okay with both guys, lower level of competition, developmental players for me. And then they go to the Senior Bowl. Both guys were outstanding. And you say like, all right, well, yeah, but we didn't get that full season this past fall. So there's a whole bunch of improvement that we didn't see. And if Walker Little made a similar jump off of what we saw in September of 18, I mean, what are we talking? We're talking about an outstanding player.
Yeah, you're talking about him in the Penny Sewell tier right now.
No doubt.
Like that's where you're talking about it because that's the level of physical tools and the way he moves at his size. And again, like your last year of college tape is the one you only go back and watch if like years prior were better or position change. Like it is that last year that everyone, that shows you what a guy is really capable of. And then we missed 2 last years, on the guy like Walker Little. So yeah, I do think that his sort of trajectory of his career was going to be a better, he's 24th on our draft board. His trajectory was higher than that by the last time we saw him.
So I want to ask you as well about the Ohio State linebackers. There's 4 of them in this class. 3 of them were down at the Senior Bowl. I was actually surprised the 4th one wasn't down there as well. That was Pete Werner. And they're stacked. Typically, you would see Baron Browning at the top of most boards, maybe Pete Werner. But you guys have Justin Hilliard as the top guy in that stack. And I want to ask you, this is a guy that, like Walker Little, like Jason Oweh, we haven't seen play a ton of defense, especially up until this season. But you guys have him number 1. What is it about Hilliard that makes him the top guy for you guys overall?
Man, I just keep going back to that Alabama tape when kind of no one else in the Ohio State defense was showing up. He is coming downhill and attacking, an NFL basically offensive line and beating and shedding blocks consistently in that game. Was in that game that at least their best linebacker. I think he had something like 6 stops in that game. And like not a lot of those other guys in that Ohio State linebacking core kind of have that playmaker mentality the way Hilliard does. And that's why he stops on the board. Obviously didn't test great at his pro day. Probably going to drop him down the board after that just because 4.840 as an undersized linebacker, it's a tough sell. I still think he has the ability to take on blocks, but it may be more of a limited player. And then Browning and Werner, obviously Borland, I don't see as an NFL
prospect. He's a limited player.
Honestly.
Yeah, sure.
But Baron Browning is just, I think he's going to be an edge rusher in the NFL. I think that's where he has to go. Like he is just the sort of play speed in any complex off-ball role was completely lacking. And they tried to simplify it over the course of his career because of that. And I think his past year had his best year because he was in a more simplistic role, but like he's at his best when he's just going and free reign, letting his athletic tools take over. To me, that's an edge defender. He tested out like an elite edge defender. Could definitely has the length to play there. So I think that's where I would go with Baron Browning. And then Werner's interesting. I just think he's very solid. I know on like the broadcast yesterday during the pro day, they called him like instinctual. And I just never saw that on his tape. Werner did not strike me as an instinctual linebacker. He was more just a guy who you could feel comfortable him doing a lot of different things. I just don't think he's ever going above and beyond that a lot of the things, which as an NFL starter, but just not a guy who's going to get me too excited.
So another guy in the Big Ten that you guys are really high on is Indiana safety Jamar Johnson. We've talked about him a little bit here on the show, an underclassman who declared earlier. So I want to get further thoughts from you. What stands out to you about Jamar Johnson, and how do you feel he best transitions to the NFL?
Yeah, so he's a guy who sophomore year, 2019, played slot corner for them. Junior year, transitions to safety. And obviously a lot of guys, Big Ten, you didn't get a lot of tape on him, but even that limited amount of tape, you saw high-level plays on the football at the catch point from like a number of different roles. Obviously, when slot corner, you saw him going vertical and contesting balls and getting picks on like seam routes. This past year against Ohio State, he has a play from the middle of the field where he's shaded one way, flips his hips, goes back to the other seam, makes a pick. Saw him coming down from quarters. You saw him going backwards from quarters and making plays on the football. It's like, to have so little tape that he had and to have that many plays, just the movement skills and the ability and the smoothness and coverage is all there. Not a good tackler, not super willing, not a box guy whatsoever. But I think that coverage ability is what I would buy into, and what obviously we buy into here at PFF about translating to the NFL. And the fact that he's done in such a diverse role already really makes you feel comfortable about that guy playing in the league.
Yeah, I mean, with all the multiplicity we see across all schemes right now in terms of how they use all their defensive backs, he's going to find a role that 6-7 years ago, I think people may have had more of trouble trying to peg him, but I think now it's easy to kind of translate him to a number of different spots in NFL secondaries. Last thing here, last time you came on the show, I asked you about a guy that you like more than anybody else, and you answered that it was Iowa State quarterback Brock Purdy. Now, Brock went back to school. We're talking about him over the course of the next 13 months. But who is a guy now that we know that who this class is, and we're now catching up with you again, that you would say is like your guy? Who is someone that you know for sure that you personally like more than maybe what the consensus would dictate?
I'll say Elijah Moore.
Nice.
I'm a massive fan of what he brings to the table. Obviously, his pro day was off the charts. 4.3, 6.6, something, 3-cone, just the movement skills, change direction, speed. It's all there. And yeah, he's undersized, but he plays physical football. You saw him getting pressed by J.C. Horn. He did better against J.C. Horn in press coverage than any other wide receiver I saw this year. Now, obviously, going the slot's a little bit different, but he got off him with ease. His ability there at the line, and then a lot of physical, tough catches on his tape to where like start to think, yeah, he played the slot at Ole Miss, but I think this guy might be able to get the job done on the outside and actually win there in a way like a Tyler Lockett does from the outside, despite not having your prototypical X wide receiver type of body. To me, the gap between him and Jalen Waddle, who everyone is pegging as easy number one guy in that similar mold build, I don't think it's that big. I think the biggest difference is just what they do with the ball in their hands after the catch. Waddle is more dynamic, but as route runners, their ability to get open, ability to haul in passes, it's pretty close in my eyes. So that's how I feel like Elijah Moore, this guy, if he doesn't go in the first round, I would be, calling him one of the steals of the draft on draft night.
Well, certainly one of the more dynamic players in this class. Mike, you guys have done great work all throughout the draft season. We're almost there. We're on the home stretch. Thanks so much once again for joining us. And everybody, make sure you go check out the new PFF Big Board over at Pro Football Focus. Mike, thanks again for joining us, man.
For sure, Fran. Anytime, man.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, let's keep the show going now with Ben Fennell here in Draft Buzz. Ben, excited to break down another mock draft. Last week, we did a 3-rounder from our buddy Mike Renner, who was just on the show. And now we go to a 4-rounder from Chad Reuter, who is a real sicko, who's been on the show numerous times, a good friend of the podcast. Chad did a 4-round mock draft over at NFL.com, and we're going to chop it up a little bit.
Well, it takes a little more time to go through, but I'm just glad there's more teeth and depth to it.
Yep.
Because everybody wants to do round 1 mocks, which obviously are the conversation and buzz of the draft. There's so many other players and decisions to be made. So I love that guys spend the time to dig into some further rounds. So we'll spend the time to give some analysis.
Exactly right. So let's go.
Or rip it apart, or however you want to call it.
Whatever we want to outline this as, no question. So let's go to round 1, and I'll do the same thing we did last week for Mike's, where we go most eye-popping selection in the first round. And again, you can take that however you want it. Most eye-popping pick for you in round 1. What was it?
Well, there's a couple interesting trades that he proposed, which seems like trades in the mocks are becoming more popular. Jacksonville and Kansas City flopping spots at the end of round 1 to pick up tackles. Tevin Jenkins to the Chiefs and Leatherwood to the Jags. Green Bay moving up for Newsome. But earlier in the draft, the Chargers, instead of going with offensive line for Justin Herbert and that kind of depleted offensive line group, I know they've addressed it a little bit in free agency, deciding to double down again at some skill players, going with Devontae Smith at 13th overall, another interesting weapon to add around Justin Herbert, which certainly excites everybody, except maybe, the offensive coordinator that he needs, some protection up front for their young quarterback. So I love the idea of Devontae Smith going to the Chargers. I think he'd look good out there in Los Angeles with all those young players out there and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and X, Y, and Z. But I think it's eye-popping that they're going to not go with the offensive line at that spot.
What a good spot for Devontae Smith to be able to work with Keenan Allen as well. I think that would be a good person for him to be able to work under and alongside. So that obviously with Smith going 13, that means he did not go to the Eagles at 12. We'll get to the Eagles picks here at the end. But to me, there was a guy that went the selection before that, 11 overall, to the Chicago Bears, and that was quarterback Mac Jones. Mac Jones does not go number 3 to the San Francisco 49ers in this mock draft. He instead falls down to a number 11. Chicago makes the move up. Obviously, we know that the Bears need a quarterback, so Mac Jones ends up in Chicago. The only thing about this is that it requires something that has never happened in the history of all NFL drafts. Ben, do you know what that is?
I don't.
It would require Dave Gettleman trading down in the draft, and he has never done that. I think he's been a GM for 8 years, I believe, and he has never traded down once in a draft. So I would say I would paint that as unlikely that 11 would be the landing spot for Chicago or for any team that would want to trade up. But Mac Jones ending up in Chicago, that was my most eye-popping selection. Let's go down to the next one. Best fit.
Well, real quick before you turn the page on that round one there. Who do you think the Bears are worried about having to leapfrog for Mac Jones? Do you think it's New England at 15?
No question.
Is it Washington, that one spot ahead of them at 19 that could potentially take them? So that's what I think about when you're going up to get a guy. Who are they afraid that, may take him, that he won't be there at 20 for them? Yep. So I know Bears fans may say, trading up for another quarterback that's a little uninspiring, as they did for Trubisky years ago, going up to get Mac Jones. I would just like to know the reasoning and maybe the threat of other teams going to get the guy they want. Yeah.
And to me, I think it's going to be interesting ultimately with Mac Jones is if he does not go 3, what is his floor? A lot of people have kind of linked him with the Carolina Panthers. They coached him at the Senior Bowl, and there's been some linkage there. Is it 15 because of the Nick Saban, Bill Belichick selection or connection there? I kind of feel like that might be the floor. We know that Washington has taken a liking to Alabama players. Is 19 the floor? What is actually the floor for Mac Jones? It seems like now at this point that he's certainly a lock for the first round. He would not have said that 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, but now. A lot of buzz certainly about Mac Jones moving into this. Now let's get to round 2. What did you say is the best fit in the second round of this mock draft?
Well, I absolutely love seeing Javonte Williams fall to the Miami Dolphins. This is the team that did not commit to the run enough on early downs last year, did not commit to the run early in ball games. I just want to see a little more help around Tua Tagovailoa with the RPO offense, committing to the run game, and somebody that can just beat up a defense between the tackles. Look no further than Javonte Williams, as violent and as physical a runner in this class. And there aren't many running backs pushing over 215, 220 in this class. And Javonte is really the cream of the crop there. So, and then very quickly, you'll see how much easier everything comes for Tua and the rest of the offensive concepts.
You and I both talked to some people around the league here and there, and it seems like there's a lot of love for Javonte Williams. And I feel like the media is certainly starting to reciprocate that. Right, we're starting to see that in mock drafts. It seems like Williams goes in almost every top 50. It would seem.
Yeah, and there's some that maybe even have them pushing the first round, maybe in the first running back off the board ahead of Najee and Travis Etienne and maybe some of the more natural pass catching weapons out of the backfield, like a Gainwell or, Demetric Felton. But if you need a bruiser between the tackles that looks very pro ready, Javonte Williams is a really good looking prospect. And then later in that round, they pick up Landon Dickerson.
Yep.
So 2 very imposing presences to to fit in kind of the box there for that Miami offense.
Looking to establish it for sure at the point of attack with those two players. I'm going to go to another guy that goes middle of round 2, and that's Tutu Atwell, the wide receiver from Louisville, ends up with the Arizona Cardinals. I think this makes a lot of sense, especially considering, Steve Keim. There's one thing, it used to be a question of, okay, well, does Steve Keim like the speed, or is it more of a Bruce Arians thing? And turns out that it's both guys, because Bruce Arians is always trying to add speed on offense, and Steve Keim is always trying to add speed on both sides of the football. I think if you look at Tutu Atwell, certainly they've got some older bodies there in that room, in the receiver room with the Cardinals. Atwell gives them youth, but he also gives them a lot of juice as well, and he can give them the versatility to slide Christian Kirk inside, or if they want to keep Kirk outside, they can put Atwell inside. That gives them some optionality there for sure in that receiver room. I happen to like that.
I'm really sorry. You kind of threw me off there for a second. I didn't know if you were trying to reflect to the previous Arizona group, because you're like, who's now in Tampa? Arians. The coach of the Cardinals now is Kingsbury.
Yeah. I was reflecting back because Bruce Arians always loved speed when he was there, and that he always talks about adding speed. And since Arians left, they still add speed. With Steve Keim there as GM, they're adding speed every single year in the draft. And I think that's something that Steve Keim definitely values. That's what I was trying to get at. But that's why I do like that fit there. I think that's something that would make sense for them, certainly in the second round. Let's go to a
couple other ones in round 2 really fast.
Like?
JOK to the Patriots.
Yep.
Love that kind of hybrid, nickel safety linebacker fit there. And I love Levi Onwuzurike to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what do we say about their front? Interchangeable. Everybody can play up and down the line. Absolute athletic terrors. I kind of just sit up in my chair to say adding another weapon like that across the front with TJ Watt and Cam Hayward and Steven Tuitt. Oof, that's an exciting group right there.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that I think Steelers fans would be excited about. Let's go to round 3. The sneaky great pick in round 3. What's one that you're just like, oh, I kind of like that? What would be one for you in the third round of this draft?
Well, this is going to finish the conversation with the LA Chargers going receiver at number 13 and taking Devontae Smith. They come back in round 3, end up taking Brady Christensen, left tackle out of BYU, who I've been pounding the table for. I think sitting there in the third round would be an absolute steal for anybody. But the fact that the Chargers can get, I think, a day 1 starting tackle in round 3, while still getting some other really good players in round 1 and round 2. I love that pickup, and I think he's going to be a really, really good pro.
Let's go to Washington. And when you look at the football team, what's one aspect of the offense that can certainly get helped? We know that they need help at left tackle, really along the offensive line. They went out and got Curtis Samuel as another wide receiver to pair with Terry McLaurin here, this free agency. Logan Thomas has been a nice story, but can they get a little bit more production from a bigger talent? And they go and get Brevin Jordan. And I think that's a great fit. You look at what Scott Turner does offensively and the yards after catch. Brevin Jordan is a dynamo with the ball in his hands at the tight end position. He's a really impressive matchup piece. I think he would be a great fit in that offense. And he's also really a kind of guy they could use in that scheme as well.
And I just noticed that they take him 1 pick ahead of the Dallas Cowboys, who Brevin has said publicly, apparently the Cowboys love Brevin Jordan. So that would be an interesting little NFC East steal right there if they can swipe him away from the Cowboys 1 pick early.
Well, that's happened in the past.
No question.
So I like that. Let's go now to the 4th round. The best sleeper in round 4, a guy that we expect to have a day 1 impact. And this is always tough because we have these conversations kind of like in a vacuum, like just talking about this draft, leading up to it. One of the categories we would do sometimes is, all right, who's a guy that's going to go on day 3 that could have that day 1 impact? It's always tough without matching it with the team. But now that we've got this 4-round mock draft, we can say, all right, who's a player that we're seeing go in the 4th round that could have that opportunity to step in day 1 and have an impact? I'll let you go first. So what was the one that stood out to you?
Well, I have a couple here, so give me a second. So I love seeing Trey McKitty to the Buffalo Bills. I think they could really use that athletic pass catching weapon over the middle of the field. Might be a guy that doesn't play a whole lot, but ends up having 8 to 10 red zone touchdowns for Josh Allen in that offense. Drew Dahlman, we both love the center out of Stanford, going to the San 49ers, nice bus trip away. But they took Alex Mack in free agency. So Dahlman might be a guy that doesn't play right away. But I think we both feel like he could be a potential Pro Bowler. Walker Little, he could be a 1st-round pick, 5th-round pick, and we'll both have the same expression on our face. In Chad's mock, he goes in the 4th round to the Minnesota Vikings. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be a high-level starter impact player in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Demetric Felton, New England Patriots. What team has done a better job throwing to the running backs out of the backfield than the New England Patriots for the last 10 years, seeing Josh McDaniels get another weapon like that? And then going back to the NFC North and the Vikings, Divine Diablo in the 4th round. Great safety prospect there. Maybe fill that Anthony Harris role and come down, be at box safety, that dime linebacker, special team stalwart there. A couple of really good picks in the 4th round here. I'm so excited, Fran, for the middle rounds of this draft. 2, 3, 4, early day 3. This is the meat of the draft. And there's so many impact players. And I think browsing the 4th round of Chad's mock is the first kind of realization to say, man, there is so much talent and availability on day 3 here. It's going to be an exciting middle rounds.
I just hope you bring this same energy to like the first week of May when you and I are doing those marathon podcasts of like recapping the entire draft and looking at all the teams and how they, what they were trying to build.
Middle of May, Fran. I've already turned the page to 2022. Don't bring me back.
Don't even say the middle of May.
Never look back.
We both know that you've done more work on 2022 than you're willing to admit. I think to me, the one that stood out to me, and you brought up some good ones. I almost went with Walker Little, a guy we've talked about a lot on this show already. I ended up going with Chuba Hubbard, going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, this is nothing against James Robinson. He had a nice rookie year. He ran for over 1,000 yards. But Chuba Hubbard's a different kind of talent. And we know that Urban Meyer prioritizes speed. That's not James Robinson's bag. Chuba Hubbard can burn. To me, I look at him and I say, all right, this is a guy that could really make an impact on day 1. If he was the back that they added here in this draft and he goes to Urban Meyer, that would be one for sure to keep an eye on from an early, if you're a fantasy football guy, something to keep an eye on there would be that addition to the Jaguars offense. So that would be my pick there in round 4. Let's go to the Eagles picks. 5 selections here for the Eagles in the first 4 rounds of this draft. And here are the picks. First one, round 1. We told you it wasn't Devontae Smith. They go J.C. Horn, the corner from South Carolina. The Eagles could, this is the blurb from Chad. The Eagles could pick one of the Alabama receivers here, but Horn's outstanding pro day and game tape may force their hand. Philly needs his size, speed, and tenacious attitude on the outside in a bad way. Let's just round out the rest of these picks, and then we'll kind of react here, Ben. They go Kadarius Toney, the Florida receiver, in round 2. And then in round 3, you've got Ohio State linebacker Baron Browning, along with Pitt defensive end Rashad Weaver, and then Carrie Vincent, the nickel corner safety prospect from LSU, to round it out in the 4th round. Overall thoughts. Let's just talk through J.C. Horn. How do you like the J.C. Horn selection there at 12 overall?
Well, I think he's the best matchup defensive back in this class. He's a guy that wore a lot of different hats for South Carolina, had to cover big gazelle receivers, slot receivers, Kyle Pitts of the world, and a lot of responsibility. And he took some lumps because of that, but I think he's going to be very comfortable in the NFL. Very, very physical play temperament. He's a height, weight, speed guy, whether you want to play zone, press man, inside, safety. He's one of those players for him. I just feel very safe about plugging and playing him into a defense.
And I love the idea of him across from Darius Slay too, because I think they are very similar kinds of players in terms of not just their skill set, but their play personality as well. So having those two guys as 2 kind of matchup corners, that gives the Eagles a lot of flexibility if they decided to go that direction defensively. Let's go to round 2 here. Kadarius Toney. This is a guy I know that you're a fan of. You've talked about him on the show 2-3 years running now. For him to end up in Philly would be a lot of fun. And as we're recording this, his pro day is happening down in Gainesville as well.
Yeah, it feels like I've been talking about him for a while, but he's taken on a completely different mold, tone, projection this past year with the way Dan Mullen has used him. Finally found a true kind of slot role for him, and now he can project and really envision him being a slot weapon for an offense in combination with, Miles Sanders and Jalen Reagor and, Dallas Goedert. Really exciting middle of the field weapons. A guy you just want to get the ball in his hands. Ran low 4.4s today at his pro day. And I thought he was more of a 4.55 type of guy that really didn't have the long speed, but a guy that had the short area burst. He was tough, good contact balance, decent hands, decent route running. But he really impressed me with his long speed today. So a lot of weapons to put around Jalen Hurts. You're not going to get any complaints from me.
And keep in mind, too, Brian Johnson, the Eagles' new quarterbacks coach, was previously the offensive coordinator down in Florida.
I think he knows how to use them.
Connection. No question. He knows the best way to get Tony in space. Let's go to round 3. A couple of guys in the front 7. We just talked with Mike Renner in the last segment about Baron Browning and how he kind of viewed maybe he's more of a defensive end moving into the NFL. And I kind of wonder, too, if Baron Browning was the selection here for the Eagles in the 3rd round, would this staff view him as like an Anthony Barr type of presence, right? Where, early downs, he's an off-ball player, but when you go into sub package, when you get it's a rush down, you get him down on the line of scrimmage and use him as a pass rusher inside or outside. I kind of feel like that might be a nice role for Baron Browning. And then Rashad Weaver, he's just a solid player. He's really long. He's really physical. He's got a knack for getting the ball on the ground. This week, I talked with Georgia Tech head coach Jeff Collins over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. We talked about just guys that have a knack for forcing turnovers. I feel like Weaver is one of those guys. He's always been around the football, and he's got a knack for getting it on the ground or just being able to pick it up and go the other way. I look at Weaver as just a really safe player off the edge, a big physical presence.
Yeah, I love Weaver's length. Really good run defender as well. Had the ace team. Whenever he's on the field, it's one of the best defenders on the field for that Pitt front 7. And Pitt seems to put out some really good professionals the past couple of years. Baron Browning, just for a perspective of Eagles fans, I don't think it's too much different than Nigel Bradham in the way he was really a core member of our defense for a while. We all know his play personality, that physical style. And on sub packages, quite often, Nigel Bradham's up at the line of scrimmage, not always blitzing, but around the line of scrimmage, not given a whole lot of coverage responsibilities down the field, which that's Baron Browning, to a T. I thought maybe is he a Demario Davis type of prospect, similar type of mold, but definitely an athletic linebacker with a physical type of edge to him.
Let's go to lastly, Kerry Vincent, who his pro day is happening as we speak as well down at LSU. Reports are that he's running sub 4.3, which we'd expect. I mean, he is a big time track athlete. He's not, I shouldn't say a height weight speed guy. He is a pure speed guy. He's under 5'10", but he's played in the nickel. He's played some safety. You're taking him because of his athleticism and his upside there. I would say better athlete than football player, but again, you're getting to day 3 of the draft. Those are the kinds of players you typically see. He opted out of the season this past year, so you'd have to go back to 2019 when LSU won the national title to see him. But that's kind of what he brings to the table is a small, compact, versatile defensive back with outstanding speed and some special teams value.
Yeah, he's just a little bit raw with his football acumen, but a guy that could probably play free safety on the back end, maybe come down and play nickel. Reminded me a lot of Ladarius Webb. Okay. Baltimore came out of Nickel State. The guy that also transitioned a little bit to free safety just to use that ranginess and that speed. Kerry Vincent, serious track background. So low 4.3 is definitely not surprising us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point there. As well. Well, Ben, we got through it. We got through a 4-round mock draft. It was always fun. We'll see how many more of these we can uncover before we get to the draft in about a month. But we'll talk to you next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We're talking edge rushers with you and Dane on Monday for Tuesday's episode. Make sure you tune in.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
Well, great stuff there from Ben. And as I said at the top of the show, the best way to throw us your support is to go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. And if you leave a question, we will answer it here on the draft. You might ask about a specific player. You might have some players that you want us to stack. You might have a draft-specific question, and that's why we've got a couple of these. So we're going to go first to David Arroyo, who left a 5-star review saying, there's a lot of talk about guys needing to be good on special teams to stick in the NFL. If you were giving advice to a young player who wants to one day make it in the league, what would it be? Great pod, as always. Well, hello, David, and thank you for that question. To me, when I look at guys, and I'm not a person that's going to say, like, I want to give advice to young players, but since you're asking, I will say that I think, number one, certainly you always want to be working at your craft. No matter what it is, you want to be trying to get better. And I tell this to everybody, whether you're trying to get in as a player, if you're trying to get in, covering the game, if you're trying to learn more about analyzing the game, it's all about trying to get better each and every single day. So if you're a player, that's what you're working on. You're trying to learn everything you can about your position, about your side of the ball, about special teams. Certainly being good on special teams is important, but then also too, if you're a young player, and I'm a big believer in this, I know others have jumped on this soapbox as well. I think there's a lot of specialization in sports right now, in youth and high school sports. And, I just want to play one sport year round. Not only do I think that that's bad for a person's psyche, but I think it's also bad for a person's body hey, play different sports, work different muscle groups, get different fibers firing off. You can really improve your overall athletic skill set by diversifying all the different sports that you play, all the different teams that you can be involved with. Not only that too, but each of these sports brings a different level of competitiveness and then also working within a team. So all of that stuff. And again, I don't even think you need to be, have aspirations for the NFL, just preparing for life in general. I reflect on my experiences as a young athlete all the time in today's, as I am now as a 34-year-old. So to me, that's an important part of it as well. So David, hope that was a good answer to your question. Let's go to the next one here. Tarkin left a 5-star review saying, I've been listening for years and it's not just for Eagles fans. I'm a Washington football team fan and I love it. My question, does the Senior Bowl ever tell lies? I have been an avid Senior Bowl watcher for years and years. I can't remember a player showing something at the Senior Bowl that turned out to be a mirage. I'm wondering if you feel the same way or if you could think of an example to the contrary. So Tarkin, number one, I loved this question. It really made me think because it was a really thoughtful question. So I wanted to give you a thoughtful answer. And going back through, I started in like 2017, 2018, and I worked my way backwards from there. Who were players that I was really high on that swung me at the Senior Bowl, right? Because and honestly, they were tough to find because I try not to fall in love with a player down in Mobile. There are times, obviously, you're looking to get questions answered. You're trying to, see if there's one little thing that maybe you didn't see on film that you're able to see a guy do, a stressful situation. And I'm sure that there are better examples than what I'm going to bring up that I just kind of missed when I went back and did some research. But a few names came to mind. And the other big thing too is, and this is kind of a big picture thing that I've talked about in the past with guys like Dan Hatman here on the show, is that oftentimes when you go for a second and third exposure of a player, and that's often what happens for me down at the Senior Bowl. I've watched this guy on film at least 2 or 3 times before I see him live. Oftentimes, it's confirmation bias. Hey, I really like player X, so when I go down and I see him live for the first time, I'm probably going to see the positives and I'm not going to see the negatives. That's just human nature. And I think it's the same thing. If you don't like a player, if there's this guy that people are giving first round buzz to, and I just don't see it. And then I go to the Senior Bowl and he makes one false step, or he has one bad pass, or one drop, or one missed tackle, whatever. Say, man, yeah, see, I told you this guy's not good. It's just confirmation bias. It's just natural. So it was very tough for me. That being said, this was a long way of me getting to the point that it was tough for me to find a suitable answer or two for this question. But that being said, there were a couple that stood out to me. Number one, I was really high on Amir Abdullah, the running back from Nebraska, a few years back. And a lot of people were. He ended up being a second-round pick for the Detroit Lions. I really liked him on film, went to the Senior Bowl, saw a lot of good things. And I remember one of the big notes that I took down that I actually wrote down was he just carved everybody up as a route runner at the Senior Bowl. And I've said this in the past numerous times. Running back, by far, is the toughest position. It's almost pointless to evaluate a guy at the Senior Bowl as a running back during the week of practice, mainly because there's no contact, right? It's not a live period. So unless it's a guy that you have questions about in the passing game, either as a blocker or as a receiver, which, by the way, I did not have those questions about with Abdullah. You knew he was a great pass catcher. You knew that he could compete as a blocker. He was a little bit on the smaller side, so he wasn't going to get everybody stonewalled, but he could compete there. I had questions, overall about, okay, can he work in traffic? Can he do this? Can he do that from a ball carrier standpoint? But I really liked him. I thought he could be a matchup player. He goes down to Mobile, checks those boxes. He carved everybody up as a route runner, ends up being a second-round pick, and obviously does not work out with the Detroit Lions. I believe he was just now recently with Minnesota. He's been a back-end roster player throughout most of his career. So Abdullah would be one. Dayton Jones from UCLA is a good one. I was actually talking about this with Ben off camera, trying to figure out who would be a player that fits. And Dayton Jones ended up going to the Green Bay Packers. He was an edge rusher at UCLA, a big guy, and he ended up sliding inside a lot at the Senior Bowl and had a ton of success. He was one of the better players down there that year and was really, really good. And he ended up going to Green Bay and was not so good. And a lot of that was that they moved him inside permanently. They kept him as an interior player, did not play him at all off the edge, and ultimately ended up not being a great player. Now, we don't know if that usage would have changed his early trajectory on his career or not, but ultimately he was a guy that I saw at the Senior Bowl that I thought had a really good week that ended up not having a great career. Another one, Demarius Randall. This is another good one, another Green Bay Packer, which irked Ben a little bit that I brought him up. But Randall was a player that was a converted corner, went to Arizona State as a corner, ended up making the move to safety. He goes down to the Senior Bowl, was covering guys everywhere as a safety. Then he goes to Green Bay, They make him a corner, and he really struggled. They ended up moving him to safety late. By that point, the ship had sailed, and he had struggled to kind of stay healthy. And I think that's kind of where he's at right now, is just kind of trying to get himself right, get his body right from a health standpoint. But Randall would be a good one. He was a guy that he matched everybody. He covered every tight end, every back, every slot receiver down there in Mobile that year. Just could not put it together. But he was a guy that I know for fact, and this is probably the guy of all of these players that I thought the film was okay. I thought his Senior Bowl was great, and that kind of boosted him up in my mind. And by the time 4 or 5 years later, certainly has not lived up to that pre-draft expectation. I would throw Harlan Miller from Southeast Louisiana, DeAndre Houston Carson from William and Mary. Both those guys were small school DBs that had really good Senior Bowl weeks that stood out to me as well. So Tarkin, that was a great question, a really thoughtful, thought-provoking question that made me go back through my notes, which was a lot of fun. Let's wrap it up here with a fan mock draft. CMart923 left a 5-star review saying, "Hi, Fran. I'm back with another Draft Network mock draft with the Eagles trading to the number 8 pick. Would love it if you could assign a draft grade to this and point out any picks you feel are reaches or steals." So this will be the second mock draft that we talked about here on this episode that has the Eagles selecting South Carolina corner J.C. Horn. So, Chris, you can go back literally to the last segment. I talked about how I feel about J.C. Horn. I love him. He's a really fun player, really competitive. He's got good man coverage instincts. He can play the ball. He's really tough. He's versatile. He's got inside-outside experience. He can play from off. He can play from press. He's a fun player. So J.C. Horn, I like that pick a lot. Greg Rousseau in the second round. I think that this value makes better sense for me than Rousseau in round one. I think and it's not even that I don't think he's a round one guy. I just think when you look at Rousseau, there's a ton of projection. This is a guy that has not played a ton of football along the defensive line. Obviously didn't play this year. He opted out, had only been playing defensive line for a couple years. And look, he led the country in sacks a year ago, right? So there's something there. There are tools there in his body to be able to get out, to be able to be a productive NFL player. I just think there's a little bit more risk involved. And there have been some that have kind of made the comparison to Jason Pierre-Paul when he was coming out of USF back in 2010. And I think that's kind of an interesting one. And obviously JPP hit. Right, that was a good roll of the dice there by the New York Giants. We'll see if Rousseau has that same kind of that same kind of translatable ability. But that's the same kind of discussion, the same kind of gamble that you would be making there with Rousseau. It was an interesting player. And if it's round 2, yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. I love that value in round 2. Another valuable player here at the end of round 2, Landon Dickerson, the Alabama center. He's got great size. He's got outstanding, impeccable character. The film is good. He can move people. He's athletic. The big thing is the medical. If you're okay with the medical history, which is long, and it's knees, it's ankles, it's lower body stuff with a big guy who's over 320 pounds, that's a little bit worrisome. But that's why he's ultimately probably not going to be a first-round pick. That's why he's going to fall in this draft. We'll see exactly how far he will fall. But Dickerson, when on the field, when healthy, is a very good player. And again, he's another guy, versatility. Has played every single spot along the offensive line in his career. Let's go to round 3. 3 third-round picks here. De'Ami Brown, the wide receiver from UNC. Tyson Campbell, the corner from Georgia. Michael Carter, the running back from UNC. So I would say of these 3, my favorite pick is Campbell. This is a really, really ferocious, competitive corner. He's a great tackler. He's a really violent player. The question with him is going to be the ball skills down the field. Can he turn and find the football? Ultimately, this is a great athlete. He's got great speed. I talked about the competitiveness, but you got it. That is the lifeblood of a corner, is can you find the ball and play it in the air? If he were to fall this far, that is why. Ultimately, I do think he will go earlier. And so I would view this as a big steal if a team were able to get him in round 3. I've compared him in the past to Marlon Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey had the same concerns coming out. He was coached by Kirby Smart at Alabama. He was the defensive coordinator down there, same exact time. So to me, I look at him as very similar. Humphrey ended up going middle of round 1. And ends up turning into a good player. He's got inside-outside versatility and all those same things we talked about Campbell, you see there with Humphrey. So I really love that pick there in round 3. The other 2 guys there, De'Ami Brown is an explosive deep threat, a rangy player outside the numbers receiver. Michael Carter, kind of a change of pace. Duke Johnson type of weapon. That's kind of how I view Michael Carter, not a starter, but a nice change of pace backup who can impact the pass game. That's how I view them. And you're getting that in round 3. I like that with both players. Let's go to day 3 here. 5 picks. I'll just kind of speed through it. Rashad Weaver, the defensive end from Pitt. We talked about him in the last segment. Love the pick in round 5. So I would give that one an A. Then you get to 4 more players here. Jamie Newman, the quarterback from Wake Forest. Josh Kando, defensive end, Florida State. Cornell Powell, wide receiver from Clemson. Mustafa Johnson, defensive tackle, Colorado. So Mustafa Johnson, undersized, 3 technique. Definitely this time of the draft is where you'd be talking about Mustafa Johnson, especially a little bit of a shallow defensive tackle group overall. Cornell Powell in the 7th round, good value. I think that he's an early day 3 type of player, kind of a one-year wonder as a senior, came on late, was obviously behind some very talented players as an underclassman, but a polished player. He's a good route runner. He's got reliable hands. He's a good special teamer. So you feel good about his ability to stick in a receiving core. And I think he's got the route running skill that people in this offense and this staff would really value. Josh Kando, kind of a height, weight, speed player, kind of a poor man's Josh Sweat, not as gifted coming from Florida State, but that kind of player. He's long, he's big, he tested well. I would say he's had some injury issues as well, ironically enough, but similar kind of player, and you're getting him in round 7. And then Jamie Newman, look, he opted out this past year, had a really good junior season for the Deacs, ended up transferring to Georgia and didn't win the job and then opted out. So it was a little bit messy there at the end of his career, but he's certainly got talent. So if you're looking for a developmental quarterback, if you feel comfortable with him, then yeah, that certainly makes sense. So overall, Chris, solid mock draft. You made some really great picks. I love what you did on day 1. I love JC Horn. I like the guys you got on day 2. I like the guys you got early day 3. I'll give you an A. It was a nice job. So if you guys out there, if you've got another mock draft that you want me to grade, throw it on. Go on to Apple Podcasts, leave it in the comment box, and we'll break it down later right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. As I mentioned with Ben, we'll be back early next week. Myself, Ben, Dane, we're going to be breaking down pass rushers next week. It's a big one. A lot of fun players in this group. We'll be breaking it down next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
In just over 3 years, Eagles Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.